Hi class, this is my first time trying this, so I'm going to try to record a little lecture over some of your notes. Just want to make sure you're really getting all the really important and salient things dealing with our course. So you should see on your screen a copy of the notes that I've already posted for you, and I've highlighted in yellow some of the things that I thought might bear a little more discussion. Okay. First of all, I'm beginning with chapter 1. Even though we left that was your work for last week, I want to start with chapter 1 just to foreground the fact that I think our course has some pretty lofty goals, and I don't want those to get left out because we're doing this through technology, through the internet, rather than face to face. Your book says we perform literature because it changes the literature for us and it changes us in the process. The older edition said that the oral interpretation of literature is the most annealing act which humans are capable of. And if you didn't know what the word annealing means, it means to make more firm or convicting. Meaning to me that when you perform literature and you interpret literature, you make more firm your understanding first of another and second of yourself. Okay? I'm moving my hands, but I don't think you can see them in the video. So oral interpretation is very important. Not only does it have a very long-standing history, longer than writing, far longer than writing. We were, uh, I'm sure you know about oral tradition, but even as oral tradition was as writing was beginning to be transposed in a written form, this idea of interpreting another's text, or even a text that you wrote and speaking it aloud, has a long tradition. So if you're ever wondering why, as an English major, am I practicing speaking interpretations. It connects us to a long tradition in English studies. And I also think that when you really understand a text, when you really work to understanding it, it has the potential to change who you are. And that change comes about because you understand somebody else. Okay. Easy note, what could be the value of memorization? I'm looking right here. Okay. The value of memorization, of course, is the better you know it, the better you can perform it. However, you want to be careful that your memorization doesn't tend to emphasize pitch-wise the first line of a word, like whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. His little horse must think it's queer. You see how the beginning of each line features a vocal lift, a lift in my pitch. We don't want to do that. So memory becomes an aid when it makes the text so much a part of you that your performance is facilitated. But it becomes a detriment when the pitch in your voice elevates at the beginning of each line. Okay. What were the three considerations of structure? I think you can be tempted to think the three considerations of structure would be like, thesis, body paragraph, and whole essay. But your text interprets those differently. The three considerations of structure are the expression of ideas, general word choice, and the relationship of the parts to the whole. So these are all things that are not only helping you to prepare your first oral presentation, but they're helping you to prepare to write that paper. Here's the quote that I talked about, it being the annealing act, which we are capable. Intertextuality is something that you'll want to know because when you get to the poetry assignment, you have the option of either presenting a poem by yourself or working with a peer and having somebody else tape the two of you. If you do work with a peer, then your poems need to be connected in some way, either thematically, like both about loneliness, snow, war, something like that. They can be connected stylistically. Perhaps you take a single poet like Yeats and pull one of his poems from his earlier writing and one of his latter writing. There's a considerable difference in the style from the early Yeats to the latter Yeats. Or even intertextuality, if one poem makes reference to another. For example, if one poem has a single line in it about a soliloquy from Hamlet. Perhaps a Sylvia Plath poem refers to something in the Holocaust and you pull a Holocaust poem. When poems or literary texts speak to each other, we call this intertextuality. A basic definition is the relationship between text, really between literary text. If you want to know more about that term in its precise detail, you should consult Kristeva or a literary dictionary. Okay, I think that's all for chapter 1. To recap, we're doing a very important thing in oral interpretation. We're bringing literary text oftentimes to people who wouldn't receive them any other way. Hopefully, through the very act of interpretation, we're learning to understand another person and ourselves better. And we're tapping into a very old tradition.